My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear carries an emotion that has been building quietly beneath the surface for far longer than you realize. Do not rush past these words. Somewhere inside the story unfolding around you, something has shifted, and the person whose heart has been tied to yours in ways neither distance nor silence could completely erase has reached a point where remaining quiet feels heavier than speaking. They have tried to convince themselves they could wait. They have tried to believe there would be a better moment, an easier moment, a safer moment to reach toward you. Yet tonight, their heart is no longer cooperating with the excuses their mind has been making. Something has happened within them, something deeply emotional, and the message they have been holding back is beginning to feel impossible to contain. This is not a story of fear, and it is not a warning that something terrible is about to happen. It is the story of a heart discovering that some opportunities cannot be postponed forever, because love becomes painful when everything meaningful remains unsaid. You may have noticed strange moments recently when your thoughts return to this person without explanation. Perhaps their name appeared in your mind while you were focused on something completely different. Perhaps an old memory surfaced with unusual clarity, carrying the same warmth, sadness, or unanswered question that you thought you had already placed behind you. Maybe there have been nights when you wondered whether the silence between you meant the connection had disappeared completely. Yet there is something you could not see from your side of the story. While you were learning how to live without constant answers, they were discovering how difficult it was to pretend they no longer needed to give you one. Their silence was not as peaceful as it looked. Their distance was not as simple as it seemed. Beneath the ordinary rhythm of their days, they kept returning to one unfinished thought: what if I waited too long to tell them what they truly mean to me? That question began quietly. At first, they could ignore it. They filled their hours with distractions, responsibilities, conversations, routines, and anything that could keep their emotions from becoming too loud. They told themselves that time would eventually make everything easier. But something unexpected happened. Instead of weakening, the feeling became clearer. The more they tried to place distance between themselves and what they felt for you, the more certain they became that the distance was not solving anything. And then came a moment they were not prepared for. It was ordinary on the outside, almost insignificant, but emotionally it changed the direction of everything. Someone mentioned commitment. Someone spoke about regret. Someone told a story about losing contact with a person they once deeply cared about. Perhaps it was a conversation, perhaps a movie scene, perhaps a song, perhaps simply seeing two people choosing each other after a difficult season. Whatever the trigger was, it opened a door inside them that they had spent a long time trying to keep closed. Suddenly, they imagined a future in which you truly moved on without them. Not temporarily. Not as a reaction. Completely. They imagined you building a life in which their name became nothing more than a distant memory. They imagined another person learning the little things about you they once noticed, becoming the one you called when something beautiful happened, becoming the person beside you during the moments they secretly wished they could share. And for the first time, the possibility did not feel theoretical. It felt real. That realization shook something loose inside them. They understood that silence was not protecting their heart anymore. Silence was slowly creating the exact ending they were afraid of. You must understand something deeper about this person. They have not always known how to express emotion at the moment they feel it. There have been times when their heart was overflowing while their words remained painfully small. They may have looked calm while internally replaying conversations with you again and again. They may have appeared distant while secretly wondering whether you noticed. They may have given you incomplete explanations because the complete truth felt too vulnerable to admit. There are people who speak quickly when they love, and there are people who become frightened by how much love exposes them. Your person has been wrestling with that exposure. Loving you made them aware of parts of themselves they had managed to avoid for years. Fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of arriving with imperfect timing, fear that their feelings would be stronger than yours, and perhaps most painfully, fear that their mistakes had already changed the way you saw them forever. Yet what is happening now is different. The fear is still there, but something larger has begun standing beside it. Courage. Not perfect courage. Not the kind that removes every doubt. The kind that whispers, "You may be afraid, but you cannot remain silent anymore." This is why their energy feels restless. This is why their thoughts keep circling back to you. They have imagined reaching out more times than you would probably believe. They have picked up their phone. They have considered what the first sentence should say. They have typed words and erased them. They have wondered whether they should begin casually or simply tell you everything. They have questioned whether you would answer quickly, slowly, warmly, cautiously, or perhaps not at all. Every possibility has passed through their mind, yet none of those imagined outcomes has managed to erase the deeper truth: they still want to try. There is something else they have recently understood, and this realization is even more important. They once believed they needed to approach you only when everything in their life was perfectly arranged. They thought they needed the perfect explanation, the perfect plan, the perfect emotional confidence, perhaps even the perfect future to offer. But life has been teaching them that love rarely arrives wrapped in perfect conditions. Sometimes two people meet while both are still becoming who they are meant to be. Sometimes a meaningful connection does not ask whether every fear has already been conquered. It asks whether two hearts are willing to become more truthful than they were yesterday. And your person is beginning to understand that waiting to become flawless might only guarantee that they arrive after the door has already closed. That thought has changed them more than you know. They have started reviewing the past differently. Moments they once dismissed now carry new meaning. They remember the way you listened when they expected judgment. They remember details you probably assumed they had forgotten. They remember certain expressions on your face, certain words you spoke, certain moments when your kindness reached them at a depth they never acknowledged. There may even be something you once did quietly for them, something you considered small, that stayed in their memory far longer than you realized. It became one of those private emotional landmarks they return to whenever they ask themselves whether what existed between you was real. And every time they revisit it, the same uncomfortable truth appears: they felt seen by you in a way they did not know how to appreciate fully at the time. But there is another layer, and this is where their urgency truly begins. Recently, they discovered something about you, not necessarily a dramatic secret, but something that changed the way they understood your silence. They realized that while they had been interpreting your distance as indifference, you may actually have been protecting your own heart. They began to understand that you had emotions too, boundaries too, disappointments too. They remembered moments when you tried to communicate, tried to understand, tried to remain patient. They saw the past through a perspective they had avoided before, and suddenly some of your choices made sense. You were not necessarily walking away because you felt nothing. Perhaps you were walking away because continuing to carry the connection alone was becoming too heavy. That realization affected them deeply. They began asking themselves questions they could no longer answer comfortably. How many times did you wait for them to say something honest? How often did you offer understanding while they offered uncertainty? How many times did you hide your disappointment because you did not want to pressure them? And what if the very silence they thought would protect everyone was the thing that caused the deepest wound? These questions did not come to punish them. They came to awaken them. Sometimes the heart changes only when it finally sees the consequences of what fear has been choosing on its behalf. And now they are standing emotionally between two possibilities. One possibility is familiar. Remain silent, stay safe, continue wondering, and let the story slowly close without ever knowing what could have happened. The other possibility terrifies them because it requires honesty. It requires reaching toward you without controlling your response. It requires saying something they may have rehearsed privately 100 times, "I should have told you sooner." Those words have become heavier inside them. Because what comes after those words is not a simple confession. It is connected to something they have never fully explained. There is a reason they kept pulling back just when you thought they were moving closer. There is a reason certain conversations seemed to stop before reaching the place they needed to go. There is a reason they sometimes behaved as though they were fighting themselves. You may have assumed they were confused about you. But part of the truth is that they were confused about whether they deserved the kind of connection they felt with you. Somewhere in their past, they learned that love could disappear suddenly, that trust could become painful, or that vulnerability could be used against them. And even though you were not the person who taught them those lessons, you became the person who unintentionally awakened every fear those lessons created. The closer they felt to you, the more they realized you had the power to matter. That frightened them. It is easy to be emotionally casual with someone whose absence would not change you. But when someone enters the deeper rooms of your heart, the stakes change. Your person sensed that. They may never have admitted it clearly, but there were moments when they recognized that losing you would hurt far more than they wanted anyone to know. So they created distance before distance could be created for them. They became cautious before you had a chance to reject them. They protected themselves from an ending that had not even happened, never realizing their protection might help create that ending. Now something inside them sees the contradiction. They cannot keep protecting themselves from losing you by behaving in ways that make losing you more likely. That truth has become impossible to ignore. And this is why their desire to contact you has become stronger. They are not simply missing attention. They are missing the emotional safety they experienced when you understood something they could not easily explain. They are missing the strange familiarity of your presence. They are missing the version of themselves that emerged around you, the version that wanted to believe something meaningful could still happen. But there is something they are afraid you do not know. They have been carrying guilt about one specific moment between you. There was a conversation, a missed opportunity, an unanswered message, a misunderstanding, or a choice they made that they now recognize differently. At the time, they convinced themselves it was necessary. They told themselves you would understand. They told themselves there would be another chance to explain. Yet the explanation never came, and what seemed temporary began hardening into distance. That moment has been returning to them repeatedly. They keep wondering what would have changed if they had responded differently. They know they cannot rewrite the past, but they have begun to believe they may still be able to prevent the past from deciding the entire future. This is where their desperation is coming from, not desperation in the sense of chaos, but emotional urgency. They know something they did not know before. People eventually stop waiting. Hearts eventually learn to protect themselves. Doors that remain open for a long time can still close gently without anger. And they can sense that you have changed. They may not know exactly how, but they feel that you are no longer standing emotionally in the same place where they left you. You have been growing. You have been becoming more aware of what you deserve from love, communication, and consistency. Something about that growth has made them realize that if they want to reach you, they cannot come back with the same uncertainty they once carried. So they have been preparing themselves for a different kind of conversation. Not merely, "I miss you." Not merely, "How have you been?" They know those words would be too small. They want to tell you why they disappeared into themselves. They want to explain what was happening behind the behavior you could see. They want you to understand that some of their distance had less to do with what they felt for you and more to do with what they feared inside themselves. But there is one part they are still struggling to confess, because it changes the meaning of everything that happened between you. They have realized they made an assumption about you that may have been completely wrong. At some point, they convinced themselves you had stopped caring. Maybe they misread your silence. Maybe someone else's opinion influenced them. Maybe they interpreted your boundaries as rejection. Perhaps they saw you becoming stronger and thought strength meant you no longer needed them. Whatever happened, they began telling themselves a story about your heart without ever asking you whether the story was true. And now they are discovering pieces that contradict what they believed. Something recently made them wonder whether you had been waiting for honesty rather than walking away from love. That possibility hit them harder than expected. Because if it is true, then the distance between you may not have been created by the absence of feeling. It may have been created by two people protecting themselves at the same time, each quietly hoping the other would provide the courage neither knew how to ask for. My child, do not misunderstand this message as an instruction to abandon wisdom or boundaries. Love does not ask you to ignore your discernment. Meaningful reconciliation cannot survive on beautiful words alone. If someone returns, what matters is not only what they say but whether their choices become clearer, kinder, and more consistent. Your heart is precious, and genuine connection should honor that. Yet this story is revealing something else as well. Sometimes closure does not arrive as an ending. Sometimes it arrives as the conversation that finally allows two people to see what was hidden beneath years of assumptions. And that conversation is exactly what your person has been imagining. They have pictured you hearing their voice again. They have imagined the pause before either of you knows what to say. They have imagined finally admitting that they were more affected by your absence than they ever revealed. They wonder whether you would hear the difference in their voice now. They wonder whether you would recognize that something has changed. They wonder whether you could believe them if they said the silence was never as empty as it appeared. There have been nights when they nearly reached out. One particular night stands out. They were alone with their thoughts longer than usual. Something reminded them of you so strongly that for a moment the past felt present again. They opened an old conversation, looked at your name, or remembered words you once exchanged. Their heart accelerated because they thought, "Do it now." They came closer than ever before. But then fear whispered one final question. What if they no longer want to hear from you? That question stopped them. For a little while. But something happened afterward that they did not expect. Instead of feeling relieved that they had protected themselves from possible rejection, they felt worse. Because they suddenly understood that silence also had a cost. Every day they chose not to speak was another day you could reasonably assume there was nothing left to say. And the thought of you believing that disturbed them far more deeply than the possibility of receiving an imperfect response. This is when their heart made a decision their mind is still catching up with. They decided they would rather risk honesty than continue living inside unanswered possibilities. They may still hesitate over the timing. They may still rewrite the words. They may still need courage before pressing send, making the call, or finding another way to reach you. But the internal decision is becoming stronger. They want you to know the truth. And the truth is not simply that they miss you. It is not even simply that they love you. There is something they have connected to those feelings that you do not yet know. They have been making a private decision about their future, and your name keeps appearing inside it. They did not expect this. In fact, when the thought first came to them, they tried to dismiss it as emotion. But it returned the next day, and then again later, each time becoming more specific. They began imagining what it would actually look like to stop living defensively. What would happen if they chose honesty? What would happen if they admitted that their feelings had survived the silence? What would happen if they stopped pretending the connection was merely something from the past? And then a deeper question emerged. What if you were never meant to remain only a memory? That question has changed the emotional atmosphere around them. They have started looking at choices differently. Some things that once seemed important now feel strangely empty. Some relationships, routines, or distractions no longer hold the same power. They are becoming more aware of the difference between what occupies their time and what actually touches their heart. And whether they expected it or not, thoughts of you continue appearing whenever they ask themselves what kind of love they truly want. But before you imagine that everything has already been decided, there is one final obstacle they are facing. It is connected to pride. Reaching you requires them to admit that they were wrong about something. It requires them to surrender the version of the story that made them feel safer. They may need to apologize. They may need to explain why they acted differently from what they felt. They may need to admit that while you were waiting for clarity, they were hiding behind uncertainty. They know you deserve more than a dramatic return followed by the same patterns. That awareness is part of what has delayed them. They are asking themselves whether they are ready to show up differently, not just speak differently. And strangely, this is a positive sign within the story, because true emotional growth begins when someone stops asking, "How do I get this person back?" and starts asking, "Who must I become if I want to love them well?" Your person has begun asking that question. And the answer is changing them. They are seeing that love cannot survive indefinitely on hints, assumptions, spiritual longing, or secret emotion. It must eventually become communication. It must become action. It must become the courage to be known. And this understanding is leading them toward you in a way that feels more serious than anything that happened before. But here is where the story turns. There is one thing they have not told anyone completely. Not their friends. Not the people who think they understand what happened between you. Perhaps not even themselves until recently. During the period when you thought they were moving farther away, they were actually carrying something connected to you, something they kept private because admitting it would have exposed just how deeply the connection affected them. And now that secret is part of the reason they are trying so hard to find the courage to reach you. Because they have begun to fear that if you discover it from the wrong circumstance, without hearing their explanation first, you may misunderstand everything. They want the opportunity to tell you personally. They want you to hear what happened from them. They want you to know why they made the decision they made. And most of all, they want you to understand what they realized about you immediately afterward. That realization is the part they cannot stop thinking about. It happened faster than they expected. One conversation changed their perspective. One unexpected detail made them question everything they had believed. And when they finally understood what it meant, they sat in silence because suddenly your past behavior, your patience, your distance, and even the final words you exchanged began fitting together in a completely different way. They realized there was something you had been trying to communicate without saying it directly. Something they completely missed. And now, before they reach you, they are trying to decide how to confess that they finally understand what you were really asking from them all along. But that is not the biggest revelation. Because while they were piecing together the truth, they discovered one more thing, something connected to the reason they believe they may still have a chance with you. And when they learned it, they whispered your name. Then they reached for their phone. But before they could contact you, something happened that changed what they were planning to say first.